welcome everyone. We're just warming ourselves in. And as you pop in, what I'd love you to do is put yourself on mute just for the moment and add in the chat where you are in the world. Just say hi. And I know Dave, for instance, is somewhere in Korea. So just say hello in the chat. Jump on mute, which you'll find at the bottom. But in saying that, as we progress through, we really want some dialogue. So you can see as you are coming into this platform, you'll see everyone in small squares on the right-hand side. That's everyone on mute. And if you want to say something, when you come off mute, you become the same size as me. So it's a really great visual way of showing us that you've got something to say. So again, welcome, Craig. Welcome, Ahu. Thanks very much for that, Kat. I certainly get what your piece is there in terms of feeding your lovely daughter, so that's great. Please make sure that you say where you're in from and say hello to everyone, and that gives Liza and Katie a sense of the global nature of what we've got in terms of people joining here. Tonight is a really interesting and close to my heart session around the domain of listening and the whole idea of how do we get kids in the frame of reference of, first of all, knowing what listening is, what its value is, and how it impacts on their future in so many ways. I've asked people, because I sometimes explicitly teach listening too, so I'm really interested in this, but I ask people, when was the last time you were formally taught how to listen? And people say never. And there are good ways of listening and there are not so good ways of listening. And if we're not aware of which way we're using, we have no chance. So by way of introduction, Liza and Katie, I'd love you just to sort of say hello and give us a bit of a backstory between why you're here now in this environment, talking about teaching listening in a world that can't stop talking. Love that title, by the way.
Well, thank you for that generous intro, Andrew. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Liza Garonzik, and I'm here because I was a teacher, and what I saw in my classroom a decade ago at this point was that my students didn't actually have the social skills that they needed to truly engage each other. And so often, I'd find myself asking a question and children would answer one by one, and often they'd repeat each other, because they weren't paying any attention to what the person had just said. And then if you ask them, oh, what did somebody just say? They'd look at you like, I don't know, that's a really good question. And so I got into this idea of how can we, in our tech-centric world where everyone's behind their screens all the time, how can we make conversation and social and academic skills of conversation actually teachable and accessible? So I've spent about a decade building a model to do so. It's called R.E.A.L, and we'll get into that later. There are 4 fundamental skills to that: relate, excerpt, ask, and listen. So we're going to talk about listening today. So I've been doing that for a decade. We work with schools all over the world to do so. But an interesting little personal tidbit too is that another piece of why I'm so interested in this work, and EduSpark specifically, is because my dad was a translator. And so I grew up first of all over the world, but second of all, constantly thinking about how cultures communicate differently. Like at the dinner table conversation, it was truly, the joke was, he would say like, oh, someone from a high context culture says something to someone from a low context culture. What happens? And so I would say that I'm also fascinated by the culture around communication, and then the responsibility and the power that every teacher has in terms of setting a communication and a conversation culture in their classroom where all students feel included. So we'll be talking a lot about that today too. Katie, what about you?
Yeah, great. So my background is a little bit different to Liza's. So I actually have experience teaching on the international circuit, which introduced me to the IB curriculum. And so as an IB educator and PYP coordinator, such a focus for me was on the different ATLs, particularly those communication skills and thinking about how teaching in school. And since I left the role as PYP coordinator, I've worked for about 5 years now as a global education consultant. And a lot of work that I do is with international schools and international education organizations. And so often it seems like those organizations are really focused on developing more than just the academics of their students. They really kind of value the skills-based learning that sets students up for success beyond just school itself. But actually, even though the school values it, when you actually get down to like the gritty nitty with the teachers and you say to them, okay, brilliant. So if you're teaching listening skills to your students, how are you doing that? So often teachers struggle to actually voice what it is that they want to see their students doing. So there was almost this notion of, if I'm doing listening skills, if I'm just doing an activity that allows children to do some listening, then that's almost the skills teaching. And so in a lot of work that I've done with teachers, it's about digging down into what are the actual behaviors that you want to see from your students to be good listeners. And suddenly you get into those discussions around body language and nonverbal communication, and all of these things that actually contribute to being a good listener, which is so much more than just giving an opportunity and a reminder to students to do some listening. So that kind of was my experience. And then about a year ago, I connected with Liza and she taught me through R.E.A.L discussion. And I think I was a bit giddy with excitement, actually, because I was so happy that someone had taken the time and thought to really put together something that I felt would be incredibly valuable for international educators to really have this proven approach to be able to teach their students to listen well. And kind of the more I learned about it, the more I realized it, it was something that would just really enhance the learning. It wasn't too difficult. It wasn't kind of taking them away from the curriculum. It was just enhancing how they approach the curriculum. And that's what educators are always looking for. They want something that can just become an embedded part of their practice. So the one thing that we did notice was at that time that perhaps the R.E.A.L discussion format as it was a bit more US centric. So we worked together to really develop something that was meeting the needs of international educators themselves.
Yeah, good intro, and it makes absolute sense the way the two of you have combined the two different perspectives. And EduSpark's probably got its foundational strength in international schools, particularly in Asia, but across the world. The somewhat challenging question, maybe some parts of it easy. It's a three-part question which we talked about in preparation. Why this? And you've answered some of that, but again, revisiting, why is this important? Why is it important now? And why you two? What's unique about the approach you're bringing? So I guess why this? Why? There's the first one. Why would you say that this is important?
Why this for me? So with R.E.A.L discussion, one of the things we do is we survey students every 3 discussions. So every 3 kind of classroom conversations, we do a survey and we ask students to self-assess skill development, sense of inclusion in the classroom, and then also sense of purpose in terms of what I'm learning matters, to the outside world. And then we also collect qualitative data around, we ask them questions like, how will these skills help you beyond the classroom? And I mean, Andrew, their responses take my breath away. We are seeing 15-year-old kids say, the question is, how will discussion skills help you in your life beyond school? And they say things truly like, now when I go into a store, I don't stand there and look at the floor when someone talks to me. I feel confident speaking up in class, which I've never felt before. I know how to, find a space to talk at our dinner table. So the level of, to me, the why this and why now is actually filling the needs. We are meeting children where they are. And I think that there's a sense that the kids are okay on this front and, it's just the pandemic, they'll bounce right back. And I don't think this is just the pandemic. I think that what we're seeing is actually a developmental opportunity cost of time spent on screens. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. So to me, this is deeply, deeply urgent because, yes, these are skills. If I'm teaching a literature course about Romeo and Juliet and I want to have a student-led discussion, students need to be able to have discussion skills. That's absolutely true. But more fundamentally, they need to be able to have discussion skills so that they can build human relationships. And that's the piece that I just every day when I look at this data coming in from kids around the world, that's the piece that helps me realize, oh my goodness, this work is important and it's making a difference at a very foundational level.
Yeah, that's deep, and it's confidence impact beyond any mention of curriculum. Yeah. Katie, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything that Liza's saying. And I think, we saw through the COVID pandemic when students were having to transition back into school, for a lot of them, that was really scary because they hadn't had to communicate with other people for such a long amount of time. So for sure, that's had a considerable impact on students. And of course, they are living in a very tech-centric world. And also, I think when we look to the future and think about, the jobs that some of our students are going to be doing when they leave school in the future in 10, 15 years' time, the jobs are going to look very different. And what's going to actually be required for those types of jobs are the kind of people skills, because so much of what's done today is going to be automated. The development of AI is going at an incredible rate, and so what they can have as a personable skill is going to help them get into employment and good employment and be successful in that employment down the line. So I think that also brings in a small element of why now as well, as our world is kind of really changing. And I guess in addition to that, it is the fact that, through my years of working with teachers, I know that they crave this support. Teachers are so willing to teach these skills. They just, in the guidance often that they're given, they get told you have to teach communication skills. It doesn't necessarily break down for them what that looks like at year 2 or year 6 or year 10. And they don't necessarily therefore have something clearly showing them the progression of that skills-based learning. And so I think this is something that can be brought in, and because there's a R.E.A.L that's focused at students in kind of younger years of secondary and older years of secondary, it's really helping with that progression through as well to support teachers with that development.
Pick up on that.
Those questions really well. Go for it, Liza.
I was just going to pick up on that to say that we find that working with teachers, we often find that teachers say things about our PD like, this feels like teacher therapy, or this feels like such a luxury to have somebody supporting me in this piece of my practice that, frankly, no one's been talking about, but I've been feeling inadequate in, quietly so. And so I think that there's something here too around so many educators go into education to know their students, to help their students develop lifelong skills. And yet the feedback they get from their classrooms and the feedback they get from supervisors isn't always focused on those big picture skills. It's much more about, did they meet the content standards, or did they meet very particular kind of academic standards? And so I think we're finding that the model allows teachers to get feedback that matters to them. And that brings me a lot of joy right now too, because teachers deserve kind of all the energy they can get. 2 other things while I just am thinking about it. One, please feel free, everyone, to throw questions in the chat. I don't know if we said that earlier, but there's little I love more than a conversation that's driven by other people's questions. And we're big fans of inquiry-based learning. So please, it is not distracting to us. It's a gift to us for you to be throwing some stuff in the chat. So please do that. And then the other thing that I was just thinking about, I was sitting here kind of sitting on my hands, because one of the things that we teach in R.E.A.L discussion as a move to show that you're listening is this symbol. And it actually is a sign language symbol, and it means I see eye to eye with you. And I think of it for children today, I always tell them it's like a visual like button. And so as Katie was talking and as Andrew was talking, I was truly sitting on my hands so that I wasn't rocking out like this and people didn't know what I was doing. But absolutely feel free, if anything with what we're saying is resonating, go on video. You can do this. We will know what you're doing. And if you catch Katie and me doing this, That's
I love it.
that's what it's
Absolutely
about.
love it.
I think that's one of my favorite things in the R.E.A.L approach. I mean, there's so many individual strategies like that make up the whole thing. But like, I always find when you're presenting to a group of people, I mean, when it's online, you often don't see the people. But when you're face to face and you're just looking at this sea of blank faces, I always just imagine, like, as a speaker, if I could see my audience doing this at me, and it would really make you feel so confident and empowered about what you were saying, to know that there's people in the room that are agreeing with you. And I think, you know, if we can roll this out to different schools, and even teachers here today can take it back into their classrooms, wouldn't it just be amazing if, like, in 10, 15 years time, in business meetings, you see all these people doing this, they've gone through real discussion. I just think it's great. And I think that kind of links back into a big impact of the R.E.A.L program. Thanks for the thumbs up. For the R.E.A.L program as well. It's about, you know, really impacting the students to feel heard, to feel confident, and to feel empowered. And one of the biggest things for me when I met Liza was reading the student feedback that she had. And that was like such common messages that were coming through. I feel heard. I feel more confident now. I feel empowered to speak up amongst my peers. And that's just incredible feedback for us to hear from students, and so incredible that something as simple as a R.E.A.L to implement in the classroom can have that kind of impact. And just those kind of hand signals alone start that process. You know, it's the start point that can be built on down the line. I love it.
I'm just seeing Kat's wonderful comment there too, in terms of ESL and the power there. Just want to throw something in, and we've just got Erica joining. Welcome, Erica, and I'll throw you onto mute. Erica's another one of our lovely folk from EduSpark, one of our creators in EduSpark. But here's a really interesting side note to all of that. And you're co-opting something that it's native to human behavior. When we speak, we do lots of things. And there's a very interesting bit of neuroscience that's a bit of a rabbit burrow, but the research shows that structured language has a correlation. Animals that have a structured language process can dance. Don't know if you know this. So birds, particularly cockatoos and parrots, who can vocalize and mimic language and have their own language, can dance. Dogs can't dance. And it's because, in fact, the speech parts of the parts of the brain that are running speech seem to have been co-opted from the parts of the brain, you know, that are running the muscles in our larynx in particular, have been co-opted from particularly adjacent areas in the brain to limbs. So, you know, what you're doing is backed up by neuroscience, in the sense that you are engineering a new language set that's physical, that's very easy to adopt. And that's probably one of the reasons why, Liza, you're finding it so difficult not to actually do what you're saying. Complete rabbit burrow, but the whole neuroscience of this field, as Craig would tell you, is one of my interest areas. The thing that I'd love to know more about is a linkage between what I would say, if I feel like I'm known and I'm known to others, I know others and I'm known to them, that to me is the baseline behind trust, engagement, connection. It gets at diversity, equity, and inclusion in a really deep way. And so the listening piece to me is a really powerful mechanism that socially binds people in a group or in a relationship. And often we talk about empathy, but actually what is it? It's a bit like world peace. We can't operationalize it, but your approach to listening is one of the ways I think we can get at empathic cultures in classrooms. What would you say about the linkage between your work and empathy, for instance?
It's right there. And it's interesting. I'm thinking about two things. So one, with R.E.A.L, we think of listening as not just something you do, but it's really a gift you give others. And so it's not just about what you're hearing. It's about how what you're hearing you can then feed back to make somebody else feel heard. And thinking about listening in that two-part way for kids is very, very helpful. Because I think so often so often somebody can be listening deeply. And I loved your point earlier, your path about neuroscience. I mean, that is so baked into so much of what we do. And another piece of kind of neuroscience that is baked into the R.E.A.L model has to do with the neuroscience behind narrative. So one of the skills that we teach children is when you're saying something in discussion, feel free to relate it to your own life. And if you tell a story, you're actually, what we know is that telling a story helps the other person's neurons mirror yours and develop empathy. And so you're inviting somebody in to connect with your life. But to help close the loop, what is so powerful and what kids today do not get often is that feedback loop of, here's what I heard. You know, on social media, for example, and in messaging apps, there's a lot of emphasis on content. The title of this session, right? The world can't stop talking. We're obsessed with producing content. We're obsessed with telling our authentic stories. We're less obsessed with responding to people's authentic stories and making them feel heard. And I think it's that message of, hey, you know, Andrew, thank you for telling us about that time this summer when you fell and scraped your knee and you know, whatever it is. And we make that very explicit with R.E.A.L. For example, like one of the things we teach, we call in real-time notes. And we ask students to stop during a conversation and they have to write down the name of a classmate. They summarize the classmate's idea. And then they write how that idea changed or challenged their thinking. And by doing this metacognitive routine 2 or 3 times throughout the course of a conversation, not only are you, it's essentially a cognitive scaffold, right? You're asking students to do the same thing several times so they're able to anticipate it and be prepared to do that. But you're also creating evidence that they can use to show each other that they heard each other. So at the end of a class, it is incredibly powerful to have students go around and all read an in real-time note and thank each other for an idea that changed or challenged their thinking. Because I think that, you know, that's what empathy actually looks like in a classroom. That is evidence of empathy growing in students. And I think so often we say, we want our students to be empathic. We want them to listen deeply, but like, what does it actually look like? So these are the kinds of tools that we think about in terms of how do we make this super, super concrete?
Yeah, and Katie, I've got a question for you in a second, but the linkage I'm making is actually a challenge I have with the world when we say listen to understand, because attentionally listening is very demanding on our bandwidth. And as soon as we use some of our available bandwidth in our brain to try and process what someone's saying, we've lost the capacity to listen. And we know that our attention is way narrower than we ever suspect it could be. And there are lots of psychological tests that are amusing. You can see inattentional blindness and all those things. So one of the things that I try and challenge that with is listen to observe and then relay back the observation. So comments about that as a mechanism to hang the skill of listening on. What would you say, either of you, to that?
I'll let Katie jump in, but I do just want to say my favorite quote ever right now is attention is the purest form of generosity.
Yeah, I love it.
And that's a Simone de Beauvoir quote, you know, written a long time ago before our attention spans were 18 seconds. But I do think that is something worth sharing with children all the time. That listening and paying attention to somebody is a form of generosity in today's world. It's really hard to do, but it's generosity. Katie, over to you. Sorry.
Yeah, I think like as you're talking both about the empathy and also about the kind of difficulty of just, you know, listening and trying to think and but stay listening the whole time. And I think, you know, it really comes back to the notion of active listening. And that's very much what R.E.A.L is about. It's not just about students sitting there listening and being passive. It's about engaging them in that listening, whether it's through a hand action to respond, or whether it's through them then asking follow-up questions to show that, you know, they've heard what's been said and now they've got something thoughtful to say in response to that. And, you know, listening is so much more than just sitting there and doing nothing. And, you know, it really goes into just even thinking about how you're positioning yourself and where you're looking when somebody's speaking. So I think, you know, it becomes, it's just such a huge area in itself. And I think we have to recognize that. And so when we are helping students to become better listeners and communicators with each other, because of course we can't lose sight of the fact that there is, you know, the purpose of listening is, you know, conversation, really. You know, we listen to then respond in some way to people in a valuable way. And so we've got to build up for the students the fact that there are certain behaviors and certain actions we have to do. And then we have to make sure that we're actually hearing, as you said, what the person is saying. And then we need to think about what they're saying and kind of generate, or we have to listen and we have to generate thoughts. And then we have to explain to children that actually that's hard to do. And you may actually then lose where they are. So rather than just, you know, almost avoiding listening because that gets really difficult, we've got to say to students, it is difficult. So, you know, when that happens, then you just have to, you know, maybe quickly write down your thoughts so you don't lose it, and then try to go back into the listening part. So again, it's about us empowering the students with those various strategies so that they can actually overcome the parts of listening that are really difficult. And I think that's what we're trying to help teachers to understand throughout the R.E.A.L program. And then we want that to take that back into their classrooms and share all of those little steps and strategies in a really manageable, built up way with their students to kind of upskill those students over time, and not just expect them to suddenly walk in one day and be an amazing listener, and talk to them about how it's hard, and, you know, ask them to reflect, as Liza said, which is such a huge part of the program itself. You know, what was easy or difficult in that listening exercise today? And then if we as teachers are reading that and able to then take in what the students are saying, then we should be responding to that and talking to them about other strategies they can bring in to support with that. I don't know if I answered the question or if I just went off in a million directions.
You did very well. I could throw a coaching question at you, which is, how would you say that in one sentence? Which is an awful thing, and I won't do that to you now, but it's a really good way of getting people to process what they've just said themselves, hold on to that working memory, and bring some clarity. And so I was just joking, I wouldn't do that to you now. Two quick things I want to add to that, but I do want to remind people, please feel free to throw in questions and comments that might take the conversation in a direction that's useful for you. And feel free also to come off mute and do that and ask a question, which means you'll pop in and be the same size as me, and we'll see that you've got something to say. So the two things, if I haven't lost the thread that I was going to relate to in that connection, is the sense that the whole listening piece is difficult to learn, and that there are two parallels I want to draw. One is we should be framing desirable difficulty, and so something that's challenging is a good indicator that there's learning going on. So if it's easy, you're not learning. And so that's an interesting frame. But the other linkage I made to what you were saying is that it's very much, it is a form of mindfulness in my mind. I'm sure you'd agree with that. But mindfulness is not so much that Zen moment where you've got nothing happening. It's your ability to regulate your attention, allow it to drift, and then bring it back. Allow it to drift and bring it back. And that's, as a listener that I've been developing over the years, that's what I've found, that the more often I bring myself back from the drift, it's exercising the muscle, so to speak, of being able to pull myself back. And sometimes I can't. I just go off in my own little world. And Erica would know that, because Erica, who's joined us, Green Screen Gal, she and I often jam about the fact that we have very difficult attentional management issues at times when we get very excited by things. But that to me is the parallel here. So is there value in an adjunct approach to mindfulness that assists? Do you see, or have you integrated mindfulness as a deliberate strategic part of the work that you do?
So I haven't yet integrated mindfulness into the R.E.A.L method, but what I would say is that I absolutely agree with you that mindfulness needs a rebrand. It needs to not be something people think happens sitting on the beach, cross-legged, listening to wind and palm trees. Like mindfulness needs to be something. It's just a running track of self-awareness, and we need to help kids develop that. Absolutely. I find it's two things. So one, we often find that when we work in schools, some of the people who see the power of R.E.A.L discussion first are actually school counselors or folks who are trained in therapies of some kind, whether that's DBT or whether it's broader kind of socio-emotional learning, because so much of what R.E.A.L is teaching is actually discipline to stop and check in with yourself and then keep going. And that is something that kids are doing in a discussion about, say, Romeo and Juliet, to use the earlier example, but they're also doing that then in the hallway, or they're doing that in other elements of their life. So yes, I think that the self-awareness and the mindfulness and the metacognition is right there too, is intensely related to the work we do. It's interesting too to watch the kids be so proud of themselves. I think early on, what we see, one of the things that happens with R.E.A.L discussion is students all set goals before every discussion. So a child might say, I want to work on listening, or I want to work on excerpting. Then they have to track their progress towards that goal during a conversation. And then you get the reflections afterwards, as Katie was saying earlier. And so often the reflections actually aren't about the content of the discussion at all. Andrew, to your point, they're like, I'm proud of myself because I realized when my attention was wandering and I redirected it. And then I was able to write a really good and real-time note. And then I shared it with Katie, and Katie smiled. And for that to be the win for an 11-year-old in a class discussion is wonderful. Now, I do think that it verges more on mindfulness than on engaging deeply with content, but I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a wonderful outcome. Some really lovely comments from people coming through too, and I love your question, Liza, about what are the challenges, and it's linked to one of the questions I asked you. What are the key problems that you see? You've raised one or two to start with, but I'm a real problem hunter. I like listening to problems because the work that thought leaders like you two your work is in service of the problems that people have. We don't spend enough time uncovering what are those problems. So what are the problems you see teachers, practitioners, leaders, school cultures having with this under the radar issue of listening and broad communication skills not being given the airtime it should?
It's interesting. I mean, I think we approached our earlier conversation about the problem in terms of students and what's going on for them and why this is a problem to solve for them. But I would say, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but I've been studying this for a decade. And I would say that the first 6 years of that were really focused on the kids. I would say that the last 3 years have been much more focused on the adults. And one of the problems that I have found, and I think it relates back to that earlier comment about teachers saying, your PD feels like therapy. I think one of the reasons that's true is because I come at work with teachers, and as R.E.A.L as an organization, we come at work with teachers from a place of deep, deep respect for how much of themselves they bring to their work with students every day. And I think that seeing, and I think that as a result, teachers take their work extremely personally, and that when something isn't working in their classroom, they can feel like it's because of them. And so I think one of the problems that we're actually beginning to solve here is helping teachers to name these underlying skill deficits that are in their classroom and then attack them and then feel great when suddenly they're seeing progress in their students. But really what that is too, is it's not just about the kids. It's also about, as a teacher, I'm able to, I see myself serving students at a really deep level and doing something that matters to me as a professional. I see myself growing professionally. I see my work having impact immediately, not waiting until the end of the year for, test results to come in. So I think that actually is a quiet problem that we're solving for. And a piece of the way that we solve for that is a lot like what you all do at EduSpark, in terms of, I believe that there is so much power and safety in building PLCs beyond your school walls. So being able to reflect deeply about your practice as a teacher with colleagues who are not in your hallways, who are not going to go run to your supervisor and say, oh, I heard that Katie is struggling with inquiry-based learning in her class because she just talks the whole time, right? That's not going to happen. It's a space where Katie can show up and say, intellectually, I believe in this, and in my classroom, I don't know that it's happening. And so creating spaces for teachers to connect with each other as professionals, to really debrief with a lot of these deeply, deeply held kind of personal missions, is powerful. And I would say that's kind of a secondary problem we're solving for, but we've been surprised at how resonant it has been.
I think for me, one of the things that really stands out around listening and communication skills is who's teaching and leading it. In so many of our schools, it's like you have a maths leader, you have a geography leader, but you don't really ever see that there's a listening leader in the school. And I think kind of speaking and listening often get kind of swept under the broader literacy headline. And so it's kind of, reading, writing, speaking and listening. But even in that respect, in a lot of schools, there's huge focus on reading and writing. They often feed into school priorities for the year. But much less commonly do you see speaking or listening as a school priority area. And very rarely do you see somebody in the school who's really got responsibility for leading on how we teach discussion skills to students throughout the school. And then I think you perhaps get a bit of, at secondary school, when people are in their subject disciplines, a bit of a notion of it's somebody else's job maybe to explicitly teach that, or just maybe not even thinking it's someone else's job, but just not necessarily recognizing it as something that you may need to promote and explicitly teach yourself. And so I think with the R.E.A.L program, it's about really training up somebody in the school to become that leader of discussion, and who can then kind of share that expertise out with the other teachers in the school, and kind of then bring it into more of a subject or a whole school approach.
The reason why I pivoted into the teacher and the adult body is that one of the things I see is, if we want kids to be better listeners, they've got to experience teachers who are good listeners. And it's just one of those strange ironies. We want collaborative kids, we've got to have collaborative teachers. We want collaborative teachers, we've got to have collaborative leaders. So there is this vertical consistency that's required. And I do think that it's a problematic area to teach, because it's hard. I can teach people how to say what to say in the moment of delivering feedback, for instance, but because listening is such an internal experience, it's hard to construct powerful learning. It's not as easy to construct powerful learning experiences in the moment of listening. So that's sort of pivoting into this. I've used that word too many times already now, but one of those questions I had lined up for you, which is something that the people who are listening now can take as a mechanism, either something that's a bit of a signal or a tidbit or something from the program. And I'll talk about your course in a moment. That's, in fact, you've got 2 on the platform. More to come, no doubt. So what's something you could share back with the audience in terms of value, takeaways, some things to think about, a provocation, a seed that might start? What would you say to that?
I would say, well, here's an answer that is not a provocation at all. It is the most practical thing that you can do tomorrow in your classroom, or honestly, meeting with adults. It is also helpful. You can ask students in your classroom to pass off to each other. So if they're calling on each other in a little small group discussion, or if it's just the teacher who's leading, you can also do this. When a student wants to speak, they raise their hand. If they haven't spoken yet in class, they hold up a fist. They hold up a 0. I haven't spoken. If they've spoken once, they hold up 1 finger. If they've spoken twice, they hold up 2 fingers. If they've spoken 9 times, they kind of are like.
Yeah, love it.
And that is such an easy, concrete way to start making visible whose voices have been heard, and to make it so that for introverts, it's the responsibility of someone whose voice has already been heard to make space for someone who hasn't. And introverted students across the board, or I would say introverted students are probably also English language learner students who might have trouble kind of verbally elbowing their way into the conversation. If they can just put up a fist and know it's someone else's it's someone else's responsibility to make space for them, it is a game changer in terms of their anxiety level. Now, in an adult meeting, you can absolutely do this too, and it's hilarious. I would say the thing to know if you do this with adults is they lie. So students make an earnest effort to count, and they'll get confused and be like, oh, wait, they like do that. Adults will be like, but they've actually talked 9 times and everyone in the room knows it. So what
That's hilarious.
Is if you do it with adults, just know it's not actually about the number. It's just about the awareness. And you're kind of quietly shaming people into doing some more listening. It's just so hard for them to unwire themselves.
Love it. I think just to build on that as well, I don't know what kind of age groups people here are teaching, but for younger children as well, something that can work really well to kind of adapt that down would be to give them counters. So hand out, say, 3 coloured counters to each child, and every time they speak, they have to hand the counter in. And then when they've run out of counters, they're not allowed to speak again until everybody else has used their counters, and then you can kind of re-hand them out. So it's just kind of a way
Really
to simplify that.
Love the visuality and the concreteness of both of those methods. And from a very young age, I can see that self-management. If I spend it now, will I lose it later? And that whole sort of dialogue internally, that you're building awareness around who's spoken, who hasn't. That's absolute gold. I'm sure I'm seeing that other people are making comments that that's just a brilliant way forward. Are there that's one surprise you spoke about, Liza. I love the idea of surprises or ambushes or, didn't think of that. And I'm going to ask you if there's something in your field where you see people having that insight in the moment of your engagement in the training. A quick one as an example, we had Gillian Judson last year speak about the role of imagination in leadership. And she asked the group, who do you think is more imaginative, kids or adults? And I tested this afternoon with a fellow I was speaking about, because I was talking about this. And everyone said, kids, of course. She said, you're wrong. Adults are wrong. Yeah, and you see the response? And that's a real, eyebrows go up and you lean into that, and that triggers a lot of stuff. So I'm wondering if there's I'm calling that a bit of a cognitive ambush, because it's caught an assumption that we've played into without realizing and exposed it. Is there anything that you see in the work that you do that sort of are moments where people do that? And it's, by the way, adults are more, according to Gillian, more imaginative, because the more knowledge and experience you have, the more imagination you can have. It's just that we, I think, weed it out of people in the way that we teach them, and we kill the imagination. That's another story. But back to the line, what would you see are the moments where people in the work that you do with them go, like that? You got something that comes to mind?
Well, I can tell you the time that I have been the most surprised. I mean, this is a very concrete answer, and I might have a more thoughtful one in a second. But what's coming to me first was a Monday morning where I was teaching, I think, like 15-year-olds, 9th graders, a pretty standard English class. And this boy, who was not the most engaged student. I mean, he did real discussions, but he kind of was like, he was one of those
half
kids.
in, half out.
Yeah. He came into class and he was like, Miss Cowan, I used R.E.A.L. And I was kind of like, congratulations. What are you talking about? I've seen you use R.E.A.L. And he was like, on a date. And what I just remember was truly, that was the moment for me when I was like, holy moly. this skill set is, this is a kid who in my classroom is presenting as kind of not even really caring about this thing we're doing. However, he this weekend used R.E.A.L on a date to help move the conversation along, and he recognized it. And then he was proud to come tell me about it. And that was the moment where I really this was probably 8 years ago. That was the moment where I really started saying, oh my goodness, the socio-emotional element of this is huge. And the purpose element of this is huge. And how can I move away from just a very academic focus on discussion to really meeting kids where they're living. So that's like a funny surprise.
I love it. And impactful one too. Katie, you were going to say something.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to, again, I'm not sure if it's quite kind of relevant to what you were saying there, but I think like one of the things I've noticed is that teachers sometimes, when you ask them to reflect on how good they model themselves as a listener to the students, can sometimes be a bit shocked when they really think about whether they are or are not modeling that good listening behavior. So kind of by saying to teachers things like, have you ever had an interaction where a student's come along to teach you and you're handing out sheets on the tables for the lesson, and you kind of have this sideways conversation where you don't even turn and look at the students. And I think every teacher would nod their head in agreement. Yeah. And of course, you mentioned about teachers being good models of listening and communication for the students earlier. And suddenly when you get teachers to reflect on things, it's not that they're intentionally being a bad listener, but just in that moment, they're just not thinking about, am I modeling what students need to see? And so when teachers start reflecting, actually, they realize, often their body positioning isn't right for the students. How much are they actually having a conversation with the students, and how much are they just talking at the students in the conversations that they're having? And all of this can just be quite kind of eye-opening for teachers when they just take that moment to step back and reflect on it.
Yeah, really good point. There's a good friend of mine, past colleague, and someone who's got some courses in EduSpark called John Cogan. He's doing research into the felt experience of kids, and the most outstanding teachers are the ones who provide psychological safety in the very first instance. That's growing as an identified need broadly in social groups. And the interesting research that's coming up is he asks teachers, how much, for instance, with psychological safety, on a score out of 5, how much do you think you provision that for your kids? And they'll rate it very high. And the felt experience of those teachers' kids is actually significantly lower. And in a number of these dimensions, there's often a 20% gap where the felt experience for kids is not what the teachers are perceiving that they're giving. So that gap, I'm not saying teachers are bad or they're not providing that. It's just that there's an interesting gap there that's worthy of exploration. And I think that your work, if a teacher becomes a champion of that work, that would naturally reposition them into these outstanding teachers. Outstanding teachers, we know, have high capacity to create felt respect, engagement, and you get this element of I'll do more for my teacher than I will do for myself, or I'll do more for my leader than I'll do for myself. And that externalization of the motivation is driven by the quality of attention around listening. Often I feel listened to, which was the number one bit of research we did. So there's lots of identified research that says what you are doing, both of you, is absolutely central. Craig's actually pasted into the it's a good time to call this out, unashamed plug, the 2 courses there, Real Discussion and Teaching Listening Skills in a World That Can't Stop Talking. They're both free courses in EduSpark, and Craig will pop in a second another link if anyone here wants a free trial of looking through some of the courses that are available. There are a ton of free ones, but there are some pro ones as well, and some new forms of pay-per course coming up as well. And I think that there's a wealth of value that you two can bring, both not only in asynchronous settings, but to start to run some discussion groups and build up a community of practitioners, as you were calling out before, Katie, that idea of building the practice and having in-school champions and creating a true community of practice that can raise this. As we approach the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes or so, and you can see, Liza, that there was plenty of scope to keep jamming.
Yeah.
What sort of next steps do you see? Two questions. One is that what can people, besides your thought before, where can people start to begin the journey rather than a takeaway? Where does the journey start for people? And then what's coming next for you guys? Where do you want to start to develop the impact and the value, not necessarily just within EduSpace, but broadly speaking, what are the things you've got in the pipeline that you'd love people to know about?
Oh, these are fun questions. Okay, one, what can people do immediately? Hop on EduSpark, take that course, and let us know how it goes. That is just a great starting point, and I am so curious to see how we offer 4 like very, very, very concrete strategies for teaching listening in your classroom. So my hope is that you're able to, hop into that and feel the impact immediately. Then what's coming down the pike for R.E.A.L? What's in the future? I think what we've realized is that we are really, we're the global leader in this work. We are defining what it takes to develop discussion and oracy skills in children, not just in terms of the skills, not just in terms of defining the skills, but actually studying what it takes to build them. And so we are really looking for international schools who want to be a thought partner, who want to join us on the cutting edge and want to be part of this action research around defining this capacity. I think every single day we are clearer and clearer that this is a skill set that schools have to learn how to teach and assess, and soon, because without it, kids are struggling. So for us, I mean, there's real urgency there. We hope there's mission alignment. And I'm so excited to build a community of international schools who are interested in being those pioneers. If you're not interested in being a pioneer, that's fine. Like, find us in 5 years. But if you are, join us now. You can go to the website. It's realdiscussion.org. You can send me a note. My email is Liza, just like my name, Liza, @realdiscussion.org. And we can think about how to bring you or how to bring your school into the fold as we identify our real pioneering partners globally. But I'm very excited by the partnerships that we have lined up to help tackle this really giant problem.
I'm just checking that I'm going to post that link, and I just want to make sure my dyslexia doesn't get in the way, which it does from time to time. So that's why I was looking all over the place, but that's the link there that I've just posted in as well. Are there any final questions or comments? Feel free to come off mute. Maybe if you're game, just add a snippet of something you found in real value that was valuable to you today in engaging. Add that as a comment in the text, in the chat, or even come off mute and just say hi and what's your takeaway, what's your value. In so doing, it doesn't work quite so well in live environments like this. Sometimes in workshops, I just let the silence sit and wait for the pressure of the silence to. And in fact, that was a coaching session with a young lady yesterday, that when we're listening and we pose a question, and if there's no answer, we fear silence. And so we fill the silence with rubbish sometimes.
Absolutely.
So I can't do that here because it's the wrong time now, but I was tempted to. I'd love to just to hear one comment, one observation, and it's often very hard to do at this time of the day. And what happens too is people just start disappearing as soon as I ask that, which is fine too. It's actually quite challenging to do, I think, in an environment to come off and in this sort of setting. But any thoughts about, if both of you were to summarize key points, what would you say is your summary of what you've heard in a generative conversation tonight? Is there a takeaway in your conversation tonight here, or is there an observation that something that's more clear for you? Because often in that generative conversation, for us ourselves, when we're speaking, things become more clear. So is there something that's emerged for you?
For me, 2 things. One is listening in conversation skills, but specifically listening is teachable. Beautiful. We know that. We've proven that. We have to teach it. And that's really our mission. And that's a piece that I'm just reminded of in this conversation as we talk through all of the different elements. Like, we can do this, but we have to build this capacity in the next generation of students, and we have to do so intentionally. Teaching listening skills is the way to start.
I think for me, it's what you were saying earlier about mindfulness. And, I think one of the elements of the program that Liza and I have always really valued and loved is that reflection element, and seen it as so important for the students to take that time to think through. But I'd never thought about it from a mindfulness perspective, and now that we've said about it, I can really just see how taking that moment to really think through their learning and their feelings about their learning is such a mindfulness approach for students. And then it's just making me think even more about, like, how can we really develop further that notion of mindfulness in our students as listeners.
It's one of those things that it just certainly indicated, and you can probably tell I was slightly distracted then. I wanted to sort of finish with a thought to you both, in that sense that, and I was trying to find the winner of the 10,000 men's Olympics in 2012 and 2016 in London. Do you remember the name of that man? He has a famous coach, and I can't, and that's, I wanted to be able to recall his name. Listening is like the way we've walked all of our life. And so we've got these listening skills that have been embedded with, and we often think, well, actually, we walk in a very organic way that no one's ever taught us how to walk. But this athlete, whose name I can't remember, was close but not there. And his coach told him 9 months or 12 months before the Olympics to change his gait and to work on shifting his gait. And you'd think, well, that's not teachable. But in fact, an attention to a small automatic thing that was made unautomatic, and that classic case of freeze, unfreeze, refreeze type approach, the slight shift in his gait won him 2 gold medals. And to me, listening is very similar to that, in that if we can rewire the way that we've been listening all of our lives, and then use that to help kids do the same and get in front of the game where we help them wire a better way of listening as they move into life, I think we're making great service. So I was a bit indulgent telling that story, but I think that's something that works really well as a comparison with how teachable listening skills are. Sometimes just a small shift. Sometimes for some people, it's a very big shift, as we know. Thank you very much. We've got 3 minutes left, but I think we've just about got to the wrap-up point. Really appreciate the time, the energy. Liza, we've spoken a number of times. Katie, first time tonight, but first of many to come, I'm sure. And we, as a community, wish you really well in your venture. It's such a noble thing and such a necessary thing. And if there's one thing that's shown us that the world is changing at a pace we cannot keep up with, ChatGPT, AI, we're at the very vanguard of this. And if that doesn't show that teaching kids content is redundant, nothing will. And we've got to approach education in a way that prepares kids for their future in a way that's way better than just that sort of content piece. So welcome, Tim. We're just wrapping up. So Tim's another friend. Great to have you join us, Tim. But yeah, thank you both. What would you both say in closing as a way of having the last word, so to speak?
I mean, thanks for listening, right? We know it's the ultimate form of generosity in today's world. And I'm just grateful to be in this space with you all. And I would love to honestly do more listening with the people in this room. So truly hop on our calendar, send us an email. We're happy to chat through any ways that we could help your school or your leaders become better listeners. We're here to serve. So thank
Absolutely
you.
Brilliant. Well said. Katie,
yeah, I would only echo what Liza said. I mean, thank you to everybody for coming along and hearing what we've got to say. And I think, we are wanting to help people solve their problems, their difficulties in the classroom. So, do connect with us, and it would be great to see people again down the line.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the way I'd like you all to say thank you is to go to the applause and us collectively give a big series of applauses. And if I can do a screen snap of you all doing that, I'll send that as a postcard, happy snap so keep doing it, guys. I'm going to do a screen snap around. 3, 2, 1, and another one just in case that one didn't work. Well done. Thank you very much. Katie and Liza will stick on just in case anyone wants to say something and exit. And otherwise, thank you so much for your really thoughtful contribution to the conversation about something that's so important. So thank you, everyone. We'll hang about just in case you want to come off mute, but feel free to go and enjoy your day or your evening. Thank you for joining. So thank you both. Such an energy. I knew that we'd have a long time to jam. So it looks like, thanks, David. Thanks, Tim. So well done. And I will organise the, the recording to make available to you both, so you can cut bits out of that, and we'll go into Regispark and some other things like that. Any questions or thoughts or comments?
Thank you. That was fun.
Yeah, perfect.
I wish people talked.
Yeah, this is common. This is common. So
yeah,
and
but that's okay. It was fun.
Yeah, you know, they were engaged. So and there were people who are dropping out, coming back in, not just leaving, and good numbers too, by the way. So you know, we hit it up to 20 at one point, and that was good. So, all right, both of you, have a lovely day ahead. Thank you very much, and we'll speak more soon.
Brilliant. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Bye. You too.